When did you first realize you were an entrepreneur, Louis?
It's a great question. Early in my career, the very first job that I had out of university was with New Balance athletic shoe. And Jim and Ann Davis, the owners of New Balance, are actually investors in my company, Alps Meters. But I had the really positive fortune of being very close to both of them during my time within the company and recognized very quickly that they were entrepreneurs, that New Balance was an innovative place. This was well before New Balance has the, I think, close to 10 billion US dollar scale that they do today. So that was quite insightful. I also spent a moment at Puma, the large sportswear company, and that was a very high flying entrepreneurial ride in which the leadership at Puma at the time I think was on the forefront of what today the market recognizes as athleisure. So this was pre Lululemon, pre Viore, and I think Puma's alchemy in that moment was this fusion between sport and lifestyle, but very inventive. I think both of those experiences were very formative for me in creating a little bit of an entrepreneurial itch that I eventually scratched.
Well, hello there once again. I am Monika Alvarez, your host for today's Business Leaders Podcast, and we have a very special guest. So let me introduce to you Louis Joseph, founder and CEO of Alps Meters, a luxury alpine sportswear. Happy to have you here, Louis. Thank you so much for being part of this.
No, thank you, Monica. Great to be here. Appreciate it.
Beautiful, beautiful. So we're going to start with the interview, pretty much like I mentioned off record, just sharing with us, your amazing journey. We were going over your bio. Congratulations on all your accomplishments, and more importantly, we are here to inspire other thoughtful leaders like yourself and you that are here listening to us. Remember to subscribe to our channel. We will continue having guests like Louis and other more. So let's get started. When did you first realize you were an entrepreneur, Louis?
It's a great question. Early in my career, the very first job that I had out of university was with New Balance athletic shoe. And Jim and Ann Davis, the owners of New Balance, are actually investors in my company, Alps Meters. But I had the really positive fortune of being very close to both of them during my time within the company and recognized very quickly that they were entrepreneurs, that New Balance was an innovative place. This was well before New Balance has the, I think, close to 10 billion US dollar scale that they do today. So that was quite insightful. I also spent a moment at Puma, the large sportswear company, and that was a very high flying entrepreneurial ride in which the leadership at Puma at the time I think was on the forefront of what today the market recognizes as athleisure. So this was pre Lululemon, pre Viore, and I think Puma's alchemy in that moment was this fusion between sport and lifestyle, but very inventive. I think both of those experiences were very formative for me in creating a little bit of an entrepreneurial itch that I eventually scratched.
Sure, sure, sure. And more importantly, how was the transition from that role to what you have become now and the success you've been having at Alps Meters?
Jeez, yeah, thanks for describing us as successful. It's been a journey. I think we built something from 0 to 1 a lot more to do at Alps Meters. I would say that the biggest shift um, was probably the kind of urgency and the scope. Let's say sort of the lack of a safety net. Um,
Hmm.
Generating revenue, producing cash flow becomes the lifeblood of any entrepreneurial venture, and you have to build that scaffolding from scratch. At the other organizations, even in entrepreneurial roles like the ones I held at Kering, the French conglomerate, where we were building a lot of inside innovation, there was always a bevy of resources, other thought partners, and personnel with whom you could interact. So starting out, it wasn't a particularly lonely journey, but it was very lean in terms of the co-founding of the company, and at times, as many entrepreneurs probably know, somewhat daunting in terms of starting to climb the hill with so many nuts and bolts to put in place while trying to achieve product market fit. So I would say the kind of singular lack of resources,
Mm.
trying to build those resources from scratch, and ultimately realize the nascent elements of the Alps Meters vision was a major shift
Hmm.
in my mindset, my just general constitution, mental health, etc.
Sure. Sure, sure, sure. And I was browsing through your website and I was like, there was a divine moment for Lewis to launching this. So was it a trip that you had to the Alps or when
Correct.
did you have that download?
Yeah, I've been noodling on taking the entrepreneurial leap, so to speak, for some time at Kering, where I worked within the luxury sector. We were taking a lot of observations from brands like Montclair and Canada Goose as they emerged. This is
Okay.
probably nearly 10 years ago now, maybe even longer. But their winter-centric luxury playbook was interesting both to Kering, and I learned a lot by looking at those businesses. But I've been a lifelong passionate outdoorsman, alpine sport enthusiast, and skier. And I would say that the spark that stoked the fire that was Alps Meters is that I bought an old vintage knitwear ski sweater in the north of Sweden where I was at the time. And then
Hmm.
everywhere, literally everywhere I traveled thereafter, it was a big conversation starter with both, let's say, skiers and folks on the high street. And ultimately, what I sort of discerned or surmised was that it wasn't just the sweater, although the sweater was somewhat eclectic, and you at the time didn't see folks skiing in sweaters as they had done during the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. But there was a real ring of nostalgia and tradition about that I think underpinned a bit of an emotional need that I then explored to extrapolate to build Alps Meters. But that was a very sort of seminal, inspirational, insightful moment for the company.
Sure. Sure, sure, sure. And then bringing it to life, transmitting that passion or that emotional um, just liking what you were picturing, I guess, in your mind and bringing it to life. I guess there's like a whole
Oh
planning.
yeah,
So,
yeah. That's a recipe with a lot of ingredients. I would say the three that maybe were the most impactful. You sometimes read that entrepreneurs build for a market of one to start.
mhm,
I was definitely sort of the single person that I felt number one appreciated this vintage knitwear sweater, and then slowly discovered that there might be others, obviously at an extremely subscale, and then perhaps refuting uh, this often I think misperception of entrepreneurship that it's this kind of singular visionary that builds everything. That was not the case, to be clear. At Alps Meters, I think I had a lot of inspiration. I understood how I wanted to position the brand in business, but there were many people involved um, that I share the early concept with that
yeah,
helped to shape that. But sort of step two in the origination phase was to build product that would manifest our values, and I worked with some
mm,
exceptional creatives who helped to design, let's say, the value system that I had in my head. And obviously, the third step is seeking out demand for those garments. And obviously, everywhere in between, we're building infrastructure, putting our e-commerce platform together, reaching out to customers and consumers. But those were the three, I think, most meaningful steps that started to make Alps Meters more tangible.
Sure, sure. And also positioning the brand, so important, everything is about
Critical.
branding, yourself and also the company. So it's like a merge. So tell us, Louis, how do you go about planning this on a day to day? I know now you look at the picture, you look at the website and like, wow, what a success. There's a lot of planning behind it. How do you manage that?
Yeah, it's a very thoughtful question. I would say that the playbook, if you will, at least for Alpha Meters, was born out of some thoughts and research that I'd been conducting that was probably a little bit more quantitative.
Okay.
So, whereas the qualitative elements of the brand were born from my passion and this very traditional sensibility, that came into focus relatively quickly. But I did take quite a long time before making my own capital investments that were, are more substantial than I anticipated. But sizing where we wanted to enter the market, how big that market could be, and fundamentally what we thought the unit economics
Mm-hmm.
would be if we were selling primarily through our e-commerce platform was a very, very significant long learning loop. And probably that comes from my sort of conservative nature and a lot of the entrepreneurial anxiety of putting my own cash and capital into the business and making sure that if I was to risk it, I was at least making the most calculated bet. But we knew very early on, specifically is influenced from my time at Kering, that we wanted Alps Meters to be an upper market, high quality concept. And we wanted the brand to live above, let's say, the mainline, mainstream, middle of the market, but below proper luxury players. We knew we wouldn't have their authority, but high quality product at high average order values that would allow us to sort of lean into profitability more quickly than not was definitely a key. If it wasn't a strategy, it was a very core kind of tactical intention for the business.
Sure, sure, absolutely. It makes total sense. And more importantly, finding the key players, right? For to building your team. So how did you go about that? I mean, I
I
know
mean,
you had the experience with other companies, but building your team, your core people, how did that happen?
yeah, I would say at the outset, um, there were I would describe them as co-founders, folks that I knew that helped contribute to the concept and the modeling of the business. Those individuals aren't involved today, but there were many people that I tapped within my network that were incredibly helpful to me. So I would say number one, speaking to the other entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs out there, just leverage of your network is critical. I don't think I was particularly surprised that a lot of people wanted to help me,
Mm,
uh, but it was very, very interesting, the hit rate of asking for help and then receiving it. So that
mm,
that could be anything from resources to simple thought partnership to scrub my business plan, look at the financials, and then interestingly enough, the kind of core team sort of came via inbound inquiries. One of our co-founders, a really wonderful gentleman who was our chief digital officer, reached out to me and said, "Look, I'm a lifelong skier. I have a very high digital IQ. Do you have a chief digital officer?" And probably within 2 weeks, he was signed on. Our creative director came through an internship, who had just graduated from school. So folks with I think a lot of talent,
mm-hmm.
but probably weren't let's say, rubber stamped via LinkedIn with a very high profile or pedigree, but had, incredible passion, clearly an entrepreneurial mindset, and a willingness to come along on the journey, which says something about their constitution. But I think we built a lot of gravity
Hmm.
such that the core team is still very static, stable, and has now built up a lot of institutional knowledge. But I think it's interesting. If you build it, they will definitely come. I think there are certain people that are just hardwired that want to take these calculated risks and then build things together. It's definitely
Sure.
not for everybody, but I found that gravity be created more quickly than not.
Sure, 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 sure. And you mentioned something very, very key. Not a lot of people are built for it because it's a long destiny, it's an ongoing journey, um, evolving, especially with the market, everything's changing, you mentioned the e-commerce, positioning the branding, just having the concept, finding the right client. So how do you go about motivating your now team and something that you can share to our audience, how to continue having that motivation internally to continue evolving and positioning yourself as the leaders with your brand?
Yeah. Listen, I believe anybody can be an entrepreneur. I'm not, there's too much of mystique around entrepreneurship that, requires a certain type of individual with some kind of exceptional skill or risk taking. I don't subscribe to that necessarily. I think what I found is a base of knowledge that quickly connected to a passion, and then I stumbled into this insight with this knitwear piece that then gave me enough momentum to calculate the odds and try it. But I think without question, stamina and grit are probably intrinsic qualities that are required. Just there are so many unknowns, and look at the environment now, whether it's a couple of years ago from COVID to the U.S. government's treatment of tariffs. There are a lot of moving targets that require really, let's say, adept assessment and then troubleshooting,
Hmm.
and that can be exciting and exhilarating. It can actually also be quite draining with the financial stakes so high. But I think there are folks that are definitely stimulated by that constant evergreen construction effort because it is a little bit of an entrepreneur's high. I still remember when we sold our first product. Now, granted, it was to a friend of mine who purchased it, but that's a very tangible result. So every effort
Hmm.
becomes instantly correlated with accomplishment. There are plenty of things that we try as experiments that fail. Those are probably more of the norm, which makes the highs much, much higher. And if you can keep the lows relatively, at an equilibrium mentally, it becomes a very, very stimulating, exciting part. Yes, stressful, I think, on the one side of the ledger, but incredibly rewarding on the other. But I think
Sure.
that kind of motivation obviously comes from the business results, but it also comes from a pure passion to solve the problems that are in front of us. And there kind of is the interesting flywheel. You'll solve a problem, have the entrepreneur's high, motivation rises, another problem comes across, and by then you've seen so many, you probably have kind of a mentality that any problem that comes across our desk, we might not solve it right away, but we're more than likely going to solve it eventually.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then again, failures are always a space for an opportunity of
Great.
growth.
Yeah, that's
So,
correct. Yeah, it is definitely flipping the script and looking at things through these various lenses. Just one example, an anecdote. We had a really horrible manufacturing mishap at the inception of the company in which we had a lot of pre-orders for a certain knitwear piece, and the the factory simply didn't deliver. The relationship became quite opaque, and we weren't able to deliver a pretty substantial amount of our first product to customers who had waited on it for some time. And it was probably a little bit more of an existential moment for the brand and business than I recognized at the time. And so I had to call and craft messages for all of these particular users, and the kind of warm embrace they gave us because of our outreach, because of our transparency, because of our authenticity. A lot of those people are lifelong super fans of Alps Meters today, and many of them had either started their own business, were in business, and they more or less just wanted to back the entrepreneurial team. They weren't disappointed that they weren't getting the product. So it's interesting, I think, when you just really reveal your authentic self and you're shedded down to the bone as an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you run into circumstances where that kind of exposure turns into a wild benefit for the business. What seemingly looks like a downward moment becomes one in which you lift off to an entirely new level, because those customers, we instantly acquired them. We won their trust. We have personal relationships with them, and then they became kind of peer-to-peer advocates for the business. So just something to share. Sometimes in those moments, it's not exactly what it seems. It looks like a crisis. It was a crisis, but if you're kind of operating heart, soul, using the best of your intelligence,
Sure.
most of the time, I think there are opportunities to come out the other side even stronger.
Sure. And I guess the key component here is communication, having that clarity and communication with, with your then consumer, saying, this is what's happening, just bear with
Yeah,
us.
it's
We're
hard
gonna,
too,
yeah.
because you look at it as a failure of execution. But within entrepreneurship, there are just so many things out of the entrepreneur's control. I think that's what can be spooky about it. You're trying to wrap your arms around a supply chain that's distant, for example, or building customer relationships with individuals you don't
Sure.
quite understand. Even at Alps Meters, the paint, still probably isn't dry on the entire brand and concept. We're adding coats and finishes and
Mm-hmm.
trying to constantly hone the business to our intentions and to our customers' intentions. But, finding those signals in the noise slowly starts to create music. It's hard to hear at first, but
Mm-hmm.
bit by bit,
Sure. Sure. It's having
it'll
that
emerge.
that vision of the long term.
It is a long game. There's no
Mm-hmm.
doubt. Now, I think there are other people that have kind of hit it right out of the gate. It just wasn't our experience, but those things do happen. And credit to all those entrepreneurs who have lifted off very steeply, very early. Ours has been much more kind of incremental.
Sure, sure, sure. So going back in time, Louis, what is a one piece of advice you would give your entrepreneurs when they're starting up with a business, or that they get that download, they want to launch something? What is that one advice you would give them?
Now, I've said this kind of repeatedly. I think if an individual can see the opportunity, has thought it through with rigor, has shared it with trusted confidence, then definitely go for it. I think life's just too short, and I think most of the time, 99% of the time, it's going to be okay. And this is coming from
Hmm.
someone that we've failed a lot along the way. I think the second thing is, back to that networking, is just stress test the idea as much as one possibly can. I think there are tools now that might help to enable that, artificial intelligence and otherwise, in drilling down that when you start to transact, what are the costs of the transaction relative to the characteristics of profitability? And that helps to inform whether you can build an enduring profit model. We had
Sure.
sort of a thesis that needed some tweaking. I would say directionally we were correct in our assumptions, but I think the more that you can share, and it's a little bit scary to kind of expose yourself and tell people as entrepreneurs, we kind of don't know what we're doing, which is why we're looking for feedback. But I think that is probably some of the best advice I gave myself, and I nudged myself always to ask dumb questions, seek help and assistance, and get some
Mm,
external perspectives before the full launch. I mean, obviously entrepreneurs have to move at speed, so those are some parallel paths, but it will never hurt to share. It will never hurt to take a call. It will never hurt to reach out to somebody cold and ask for their advice.
yes. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I always say constructive criticism in a way, because it's positive feedback because if they're pointing out some failure, so to speak, it's because they want to make you look better,
Yeah,
right?
I
But
think that's
sometimes
correct. And I think the default, we still try to have this default. I think if you can build the perspective that you're looking to plug those insights into the company, rather than view them through the lens of a critique or criticism. If you frame it in your mind as an insight, a discovery, an additive element of the business, I think culturally you're more inclined to implement it. I
Mhm.
mean, we really try to root out, it's impossible. We try to root out all of our biases. We think everything we're going to do is going to be successful, and that's part of the risk taking. We wouldn't do it if we didn't believe in it, but we do know that many of the experiments that we run are 50-50 shots. We just don't
True.
know what we don't know. And
True.
so we're constantly sort of launching minimum viable products, running experiments, e-commerce A/B testing, and then once again letting the data or the consumer marketplace inform our next step. But you got to run the experiment. You have to ask the question first,
Sure.
and sometimes it's difficult if you're thinking white and the answer is black. But I think the external view is very, very valuable, very, very valuable.
I agree. I agree. I agree. So this has been lovely. Thank you so much for sharing so much golden nuggets. I know our audience is going to be so inspired from everything that you have
I hope
shared
so.
today. Yes, absolutely. So tell us, what channels can they find the clothing? I mean, I know you have the website. Any other channels where they can find you?
Yeah, the website's the primary vehicle, alpsmeters.com. And we're located in many alpine sport boutiques throughout North America and Europe. So these are major mountain towns where the best wholesaling partner that's selling luxury Alps meters likely has a foothold. Places like Aspen, Colorado, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Vail, Colorado,
Mhm.
St. Moritz, Switzerland. So for that jet set type, if they are traveling to
Sure.
those destinations, Alps meters is probably sprinkled and filtered into some of those high street shops.
Oh, beautiful. I love that. I love that. So are you in any social media platform?
Yeah, our Instagram handles at Alps meters.
Okay.
We're not we're
Okay.
not we're not we're not TikToking yet, but that's probably the future. Um, on our website,
Near future, because
it's happening. I think we're our brand is slowly getting down to that demographic.
sure.
We'll be there, I'm sure, before we know it. But there's a lot of homegrown content, particularly in alpsmeter.com. If you searched our journal, there are lots
Yes.
of wonderful stories about people, places, and memories connected to life in the mountains. A lot of long form narratives. So if folks are traveling or have a moment of quiet, that's a place to go to sort of learn about our value set and things that we appreciate, really about alpine sport and its history.
Yes, yes, indeed. And I guess the experience that they're sharing throughout those stories, it's what really connects to the brand as well.
Yeah, thank you.
So
Yeah, that's certainly the idea. We've had a lot of ghostwriting, other third party editorials. So we're definitely proud of the journal.
beautiful, beautiful. Well, congratulations once again, Louis.
Thank you so much. That's
Thank you.
super kind of you to
Yes.
say. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much for accepting to be part of this platform. Like we mentioned at the beginning, it's all with the intention to continue inspiring other thoughtful leaders So sharing your journey was very powerful, very, very appreciated for us.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Yeah,
you once again.
it's super to be able to share with the audience a little bit about the company and myself. And thanks again.
Absolutely. And for those of you listening, remember, subscribe to our channel and you will have all the details in the description where to find this beautiful outwear and everything. And we'll hope to see you in our next podcast. Bye for now.